From time to time, God bestowed healing to the infirm at the house of grace. Why? Well, to remind them that he is a God of grace. But even more importantly, and I think this is the main reason why he would occasionally provide healing there, was to make a place to set the scene so that one day Jesus could come to give hope to the hopeless. Look at verse 5. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" We visit the pools of Bethesda when we take a tour of Israel and we go to Jerusalem. We always go here. It's just inside, as John says, the sheep gate, which is the gate on the eastern side of the old city of Jerusalem, just north of the Temple Mount. And it's called the sheep gate because that's where they would bring the sheep that would be used for the sacrifices on the temple. Just up the road, just a short ways past the gate, is this area called the Pools of Bethesda. They are huge. They were very deep. And they were fed by an underground stream that was really more of an underground river. It brought a lot of water into the city. In fact, the Pools of Bethesda provided water for the entire northern part of the city of Jerusalem, as well as all of the water that was needed by the priests for the ritual purifications for everything that took place in the temple. So it required a lot of water. And so there are these pools that are there. They're dry now, but back then they were filled with water. And because so many people came to draw water from there, they had paved the banks around these pools so that they wouldn't be slippery from all the water and wouldn't get muddy and thus foul the water. And so they were paved, and above that pavement, these decks that were around the Pools of Bethesda, they had put a roof up that was supported by columns to provide shade for those that came to draw water. Because as we saw last week, drawing water is very difficult. It's laborious. It requires a lot of work. And so they provided shade there. And now we read that in the shade of this roof, there's this large group of people waiting for a chance to be healed. And then in walks Jesus. He makes his way through this throng of misery to stop over a man who can't even sit up. He is lying there. Now think of it, friends. This man has borne his affliction for 38 years. What that affliction was, we're not told, but it had made him an invalid. He wasn't even able to sit up. He couldn't move on his own. And Jesus asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" Which seems rather obvious to us. Why else would he be there? He's parked at the only place that healing seems likely. So why does Jesus ask this man if he wants to be healed? Well, because long familiarity with an infirmity, long familiarity with our brokenness can move us to the place where we end up embracing it. It becomes our identity. We begin to define ourselves by it. We may not particularly like our affliction, but it has become for us our normal. Healing, deliverance would mean seeing a change to see ourselves differently. So many live by the rule, better the pain I know than the one I don't. At least I know how to cope with this. I've adapted to it. I've accommodated it. Think of this man. He has been in this condition for 38 years. And he has a routine now. If he is in a condition where he can't even sit up, he's lying, he has someone that's taking care of him. Someone is feeding him. Someone is bathing him. Someone is carting him to Bethesda every day to hang out here by the pools of healing. Healing would mean a change in just about everything for this guy. He's going to be on his own. He's going to have to find a job. He's going to have to make a living. He's going to have to take care of himself. But apparently he's down for all of that because, again, where is he? He's at the pools of healing. So obviously he wants to be healed, right? Not necessarily. Listen, he's been going here for so long, it's become his habit. It's become his daily routine. He may go there only because he needs to make his caregiver think he's trying to do something to get better. Bethesda, where all his buddies were, his fellow invalids. They would meet there to share their misery. Misery loves company. Every so often when the water would stir, someone would jump into the water and come out healed. And I could just picture this guy with his pals. He probably hangs out with people. He's got his little clique that he meets with there. You know, his caregiver brings him in, puts him down next to his friends. There they are talking about this or that. The water stirs. There's this hullabaloo. They look over. They see somebody coming out of the water healed. And they go back to playing backgammon, back to playing Texas Hold'em. Somebody got healed. Wasn't us. Again. Oh well. Just another day at Bethesda. Friends, this here is Bethesda. This is the house of grace. We meet to bathe in God's cleansing waters of His Word. Why are you here? Why are you here? Do you come out of habit? Do you come to meet friends? Or do you come to be healed and delivered and set free? All of us have some lameness, some brokenness, some infirmity that we need God to heal. Can I get an amen? We all have something that we need God to touch. Something we've struggled with, something we've embraced, and we know that it's not right, but it's become who we are, and we're kind of accommodated to. We've adapted ourselves to it. And change is risky. But there's a part of us that says, man, if I could just get past this, if I could just get over it. All of us have a need for change. Verse 7, the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." Remember, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" He made no reference to the pool. Jesus didn't say, do you need help into the pool? No, he said, "Do you want to be made well?" But this guy assumes that Jesus was asking why he wasn't well. What excuse did he have for still being there, still coming to Bethesda every day? And he has his excuse already. I don't have anybody to help me. Somebody always beats me in. There is no end to the excuses that we give for why we haven't changed. We blame others. We blame our surroundings, our circumstances, our own inability. Question. In light of this man's reply, why is this guy still coming to Bethesda every day? Why is he still coming? If when Jesus asked, "Do you want to be made well?" somebody always beats me in. Why is he there? Well, the question is, where else is he going to go? Though his hope of healing is small, Bethesda is the only place that hope finds space. I want to speak to probably what is a very small group of people here today. Maybe one, two, maybe three. Maybe someone online is watching on Facebook Live right now and they're not here, but they find themselves always tuning back in to a church service. There are those that go to church for a while. They'll go to a specific church for a while. Although they're not believers, they're not Christians. But there's something inside them that draws them. There's a need that they have, and so they come because they have a hope that they can change. They'll go for a while until the Holy Spirit draws them and they come to a crisis of decision, and instead of diving in, they back away because they have an excuse, some excuse. And then they stop going altogether. They may stop going for several months, sometimes a few years, but they always end up coming back. Maybe not to the same church. Maybe it's a different church. Because in their mind it's, well, that church didn't meet my need, but maybe this other church will. And you guys know how the cycle goes, right? One church is hot for a little while, and then it diminishes, and then another church is hot for a little while. And so people will kind of float from place to place. And so they'll go back. They want to believe. They hope to change, and they have that hope stoked by being with those that God is changing. But the battle rages inside as they realize that change means just that, change. They so identify themselves with their brokenness that change spooks them, and so after a while they bail. But eventually they find themselves back in church because where else are they going to go? Do you remember what the disciples said to Jesus when he had challenged them with some really challenging, some really difficult words, and the crowds left? And Jesus turned to the disciples and he said, "Are you guys going to bail too?" And what did they say? "Where else are we going to go? You alone have the words of life." And there are so many people that have tried what the world has to offer and find it lacking, empty. And they end up finding themselves back in the one place where they hear the ring of truth. And they know it's difficult. If that's you, if you're the one who feels like an outsider, today is your day. Like the man that we read about here, you've watched others dive in and be healed. You've wondered when it was your turn. When asked what's holding you back, you've always had your excuse. If maybe you didn't say it to somebody else, you always gave that excuse internally. But today, right now, you realize I'm lame and I need healing. This is your Bethesda. This is your house of grace. The stirring of the waters comes today by the Holy Spirit moving through this story. Today is the day that you need to dive in and be healed. Verse 8, Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. This man couldn't get to the healing, so Jesus brought the healing to him. And note that Jesus issued a command, which to obey required the man be healed. Jesus told him to stand up and do what he'd been unable to do before. He had a choice to make. To stand and walk or to stay prone. He obeyed. He stood. He picked up his mat and began walking. Friends, God never calls us to do a thing without giving us the ability to do it. His command is his enabling. But that enabling carries with it the necessity of obedience. Jesus didn't heal this man so he could go on acting lame. And Jesus does not heal us of sin so that we can go on living in it. He gives us new life so we can live in it. Now, verse 10, we need some musical score in the background going do-do-do-do. So we come to verse 10. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "Well, he who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" This all took place on the Sabbath, when carrying a burden was prohibited. Not by the law of God. It was one of their rules about how to keep the Sabbath. God had given the command, don't work on the Sabbath. And along with a bunch of other stuff, these guys had interpreted this to mean don't carry a burden. Now let me ask you a question. If you have been lame for 38 years, would carrying the mat that you've been laying on all that time be a burden? No, it would be fun. That'd be a blast. Look, it's on me, I'm not on it. This guy is doing something he'd not done in a long time, if ever. This wasn't work, this was a delight, this was fun. No, he tells his critics, "Hey, the guy who healed me, he told me to do what I'm doing." That's a great answer. Verse 12. Then they asked him, Who was the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Notice they didn't ask, who's the man who healed you? Who's the guy who told you to take up your bed and walk? But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So these self-appointed rule police wanted to know not who healed him, but who was telling him to break one of their precious rules. And he couldn't say because Jesus didn't grandstand. When this guy stood up and turned around and picked up his mat, Jesus just slipped through the crowd, just left. Isn't that interesting? Note this. Here's another great opportunity for Jesus to go, yep, I did that. He doesn't. He slips away. Man turns around. Where'd he go? Can't even find him. How humble is our God? Think about the utter joy that must have marked this man's first steps. A totally new future is stretching in front of him. He can walk. He's got strength to carry his mat. Think about it. His whole future has opened up. Everything has changed for this guy. Maybe he can get married now. Maybe this guy can have a family. He was bursting at the seams with excitement, and then along comes the parade rainers, the dour joy suckers. You're breaking the Sabbath. These people are still around, folks. They're worried someone somewhere is having a good time, and they're determined to stop it. They think religion should be difficult. They're suspicious of pleasure in any form. They think a relationship with God is all about jumping through a bunch of hoops. They think it's a list of rules that we have to memorize and keep. They don't know what to do with someone who was once sunk in sin, crippled by their brokenness, who is now wonderfully saved and healed and set free. And so they try to press him into their mold, their idea of what it means to be godly, but it's not what godliness is. It's just a stuffy, joyless drudgery. Verse 14, afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. Sometime later, this guy goes up to the temple, of course, to worship and to give God thanks for his healing. And Jesus finds him and calls him to make an end with sin. Because while being unable to walk is a tragedy, being unable to enter heaven is far worse. Of interest to me as we end this morning is this last word of Jesus to this guy. Just as earlier he had told him to take up his bed and walk, he now tells this man, make an end with sin. And just as before his command was the enabling to do it, so here, his command to this man to make an end with sin is his enabling to do it. Here in the house of grace, friend, is sufficient grace for you and for I to make an end with sin. Sin need no longer have dominion over our lives. And that is why, as we talk about identity, this man's identity as an invalid, being shuffled aside, being laid down, embraced now in someone who is healed. It's one of the reasons why, as Jesus says, make an end with sin, I think that you and I as Christians need to stop identifying ourselves as sinners. We are not sinners in Jesus Christ. We have been born again. We are new creations. We were sinners, but we are now saints. We need to put that away. We need to stop saying, well, I'm just a sinner saved by grace. No, you're much more than that. You're a son. You are a daughter of God. And his glory is being progressively unrolled in you. And as Jesus said to this man, make an end of sin, his command is his enabling. What he says to him, he says to us, I've saved you from sin. Walk no longer in it. Be free from sin. Let that be a word of encouragement to those of you that are struggling. I know that in a room this size, there are many that would say, I fight this battle with sin and I don't seem to have any victory over it. Don't look to your own strength. Don't try to tough it out. Don't make your own list of rules. of how to obey. Find your enabling, find your strength to walk in righteousness before God, in His grace and in His strength. Surrender to Him and let His love for you become the strength and the motivation that sets you free. Do you feel like you've kind of been waiting? You see others have made it in and their lives are being changed, and you say, well, that's good for them, but it's just not for me. No, today is the day that Jesus comes to you and says, be healed. Now get up and walk with me.